Oh no, no, it's fine. No. Okay. Well, it's great to see you guys with us. We were expecting a few more, so others may join as we go. But myself and Kathryn just wanted to put this on today because we've been getting lots of questions about the future of work, how to return to the workplace, what should flexible working kind of look like, how flexible should flexible be. And it really does depend very much on the individual business. But one thing is really, for me and to Kathryn, I think, is no one really wants it to be the same as going back to January 2020. So we've got a huge opportunity to do things a little differently, and everyone seems up for that. Employers, employees, yourselves, I guess, you know, the fact that you've booked on this webinar means that you are too. So I've heard Kathryn speak a few times on the future of work, and her research is really enlightening. And I really wanted to bring this to my kind of clients and my contacts to enable us to reflect on, you know, what the wider thinking is on the future of work, and enable you all as small business owners, as HR professionals, to make your decisions within the knowledge of what Kathryn will share with you. So Kathryn, I'd love to hand over to you, if that's okay. Do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'd love to hear what you've got to say.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane, for having me join the webinar today, and lovely to meet you all who've joined us as well. So yes, I'm Kathryn Jeacock. I run DBKT Coaching, and we're on a mission to revolutionise the world of work. So I work with businesses to equip them with the tools to collaborate, problem solve and lead in the 21st century world of work. And this is based in my MA research that I've been conducting, and I'm going to share some of those insights with you today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so this is going to be a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it gives you a bit of an overview in terms of what the 21st century organisation really looks like. So a lot of our organisations are built on frameworks still based on industrial age thinking. So that's on the foundations of the early 1900s of the Industrial Revolution. And for organisations today operating in the 21st century of the technology and knowledge economy, these principles that we've built into our organisations are actually starting to creak, if not break. So the 21st century organisation requires us to rethink and reimagine how we operate, so that we can lead and engage our people for the world of work that they're operating within. And it requires some different practices, structures and skills. And COVID has really accelerated a lot of those changes that were already coming into force. So here are the 5 factors for the future of work. And I'm just going to really quickly give you an overview of what each of those factors mean, so you can start thinking about what that might mean for your organisation. So the first factor is around lifelong learning. So at the moment, our lives have been built around this 3-stage life of education in our early years, a career, and then a long retirement. Well, actually, most of us are going to be active, economically active well into our 70s. So that model of work doesn't work anymore. So organisations need to be looking at how can you have multiple entry points into an organisation. So we talk a lot about graduates, but actually, how do older people who need to reskill and learn new skills come into the workplace at different points throughout their journey? And we can't work like we have been working, full time for that period of time. So it's about how do organisations create those environments where people can ramp up and ramp down to meet where they are in their lives. Automation and AI is also going to provide some challenges within organisations, because there are going to be tasks that can be automated. So people are going to have to think about how they need to reskill, upskill, have multiple careers. And it's really about having that lifelong learning and growth mindset that's going to help people to cope with this sort of change in the way of living. The next area is around community and collaboration. So our organisations are structured on hierarchies. hierarchies are not going to work in the future going forward. It's very much going to be around self-managed teams. So you have teams of people who have responsibilities, they're trusted, working on an outcomes base to manage themselves to deliver great things for organizations. And those teams aren't always going to be static. So it's about having teams that can come together to work on a project, disperse and work on something else. So you don't have these sort of siloed, structured, very fixed teams. It's all very fluid and moving around. We're also working in a more systemic way. So no longer can organizations afford to just be insular and siloed beings. It's about partnering with different people, the communities that you're serving. And what I found really interesting was that Pfizer were able to develop their vaccine so quickly, not only because they worked across the organization, they also worked with partners, but they also worked with their competitors to deliver the vaccine. And the CEO of Pfizer has said that that's the way forward, particularly for fast innovation. The second area around community and collaboration is around sustainability. So that's not just about the environmental aspect, which is very important, but it's also about that sustainability of well-being, making sure that people are well within their organizations and that we're treating people with care and compassion. The next factor is around purpose-driven organizations and people practices. So a lot of organizations have been striving to be the best in the world, but actually future organizations need to be looking about being the best for the world. So it's about creating meaning in your business. What is the purpose that it's solving, not just about making money? And how do we create jobs that are really meaningful for people? The next area around purpose-driven organizations is about transparency. So if you're having self-managed teams, and if you're treating people with more care and compassion and trust, they need the information to be able to make informed decisions, which means that not all the information is kept at the top of the hierarchy with the exec teams. We're trusting people to have information so that they can make the best decisions for the organization. Trust and simplicity is also really important in this. So a lot of the time we manage by lots of complicated bureaucracies, processes, multiple policies that cover every single thing that might happen within an organization. Well, if we're operating from a basis of trust, actually it's about creating processes and policies for the majority, not just the one or two who might cause an issue within the organization. So it's through that leadership, through trust. So I'm hearing a lot of things around policies around fair play policies and don't be a dick policies, those types of things. The other area to look around is boundlessness. So at the moment, we're very confined within our days of work, our hours of work, where we work, when we work. You know, I find it really interesting, the psychology behind offices is quite like a hospital. You know, there's not security on the doors, but people don't feel that they can leave until it's their time or until someone tells them that they can. And I think there's something really interesting happening there around particularly this return to work from sort of COVID and the lockdown. And then the next bit is around this person-centered approach. So more humane human policies and processes, really treating people as adults in the workplace. So a lot of the processes and things that we have in place with our people are based on parent-child relationships. We've sort of very much infantilized our people within the organization, but actually we're all adults in the workplace. We all have agency, we all have self-responsibility. So how can we create the systems and processes that support and get the best out of people? The next area is around inclusivity and equity. So it's about really creating the space, moving away from being blind to now being seeing, to ignoring, to noticing things that are going on, and making sure that we've got advocacy, representation and allyship happening within our organisations. And that's really important, particularly within the innovation space, because you need that diversity of thought to really innovate for great products, projects and services. Having that safety within your organisation so people don't feel that they need to code switch, that they don't feel they have to assimilate, that they can be themselves. And by being themselves, you get the best from them because the ideas, the thoughts, the expertise and knowledge that they can bring, that's what's really going to add value to your business. And the other thing that I find really interesting is equity. Coming from a HR background, everything's been around equality. And I've really found it interesting, this movement towards equity, about distributing resources based on the needs of each person, understanding what different people need and giving them what they need so that they can reach that equal, fair outcome. And I think that's really important. The last aspect is around curiosity-led leadership. So no longer can one individual sit at the top of an organization and make all the decisions and have all the knowledge. The world is too fast-paced, it's too uncertain, it's too volatile. So our leaders very much need to be in this curiosity space. So asking the questions, using the diversity and the talents of the team, being vulnerable to say, look, I don't know, I'm interested to hear from you. Being human, it's been great through lockdown, people sort of seeing more of the personal side of people with children and cats and things, and coming into Zoom calls. But the purpose of a leader should also be around developing others, and that's through collaboration and problem solving. And problem solving is something that I'm going to move on to next, because actually it's a skill that a lot of organizations are lacking. So as I said, that's a whistle-stop tour of the 5 factors of the future of work. But here's some recent research that's been done in the technology sector, and it's showing that organizations are really lacking in these key leadership and collaboration skills that are needed for organizations to thrive in the future of work. And problem solving is one of those ones that we really struggle with. And that's because we typically tend to move straight to solutioning. We feel that we have to have the solution right away. So when we're thinking about the return to work, iteration is fine, coming up with a solution, but then iterating as you're learning and getting feedback, and involving others in that problem solving is really key. So one of the things that I've been doing with organizations is around action learning. So I've used action learning with executive teams, leadership teams, and project teams. And it's a really great way to get teams to collaborate and learn problem-solving skills, but also to develop those leadership skills, whilst also solving complex, real and urgent problems. So in action learning, you get a diverse group of people. So I was talking about the future of the future of work is around being more collaborative and not being so insular. So you might get a team around you that consists of customers, clients, supply chain people, partners, different people in different teams from across your organization. You have a team coach that's facilitating that meeting, and there are some rules around it to help with the problem solving process. So statements can only be made in response to a question. So this keeps us nice and concise, because a lot of time when we're in meetings, we like to share our expertise, and sometimes people can be quite verbose and domineering in meetings. And questions are emphasized within the problem solving, because this helps us to explore the problem without going straight to solutioneering, and it helps to keep us focused. So with action learning, as you can see on the right, there's a problem solving process, and we stay very much in exploring the problem before moving on to the goal and then the solution. And I found, as I said, that this has worked really well in developing those problem solving skills within organizations. But I could talk for days about the future of work, and particularly around action learning. I'm very passionate about it, but I think it's really important. I think we've got a poll next, and then Jane's going to bring this into the more practical side of things around HR.
Thanks, Kathryn. That's fantastic. It's great to hear from you. Do post any questions that you may have for Kathryn and the content that she's just shared in the Q&A. I am going to do a quick poll now. So please do feel free to vote in the poll. We'd love to know, what is your people priority for the next 6 to 12 months? Are you just very much get everyone back in the workplace, business as usual, let's just crack on? Or are you taking more of a kind of learning approach from last 12 to 18 months, or do you want to really like throw it all up in the air and explore some completely new ways of working? So we'd love to know from you, and this I'm sure will be interesting for Kathryn as she continues her research and her support for her clients. So I will just leave that a couple more seconds, and then I'm going to go on to share with you some more thoughts around, you know, what our sort of people priorities should be. So thank you very much for doing that. Really interesting that most of you want to take the learning from the last 12 months and have a bit of mix of home working and in-person working. But also 38% of you want to explore some completely new ways, which is really, really interesting to hear. So thank you very much for that. So I'd like to share with you a few thoughts today from me, and you know, what my kind of clients and contacts are experiencing, and what should our sort of priorities be as we do face the future, taking into consideration some of the things that Kathryn's pointed out. Now, the 9 to 5 working day was designed well over 100 years ago, and yet we still seem very wedded to this. The majority of employment contracts, that certainly that I see, still works this format. So most people are telling their staff, you know, your hours are da, da, da. Even though in practice most of us don't actually stick to that, and obviously many of you will have a much more flexible approach to work depending on what your business is and whether, you know, how much you can kind of facilitate that. But over the past 18 months, obviously it's all been thrown up in the air, and around half of us, half the workforce, worked from home at some point during, you know, the kind of COVID months, and around 40% of employers now still expect probably more than half their workforces to continue to work regularly from home. So that tallies though with what people want to do. So about 3/4 of staff actually do want to still continue working from home, and many of those, a large proportion, perhaps as much as 25%, want to do that for the majority of the time. So like sort of over 2 to 3 days a week. And we saw lots of benefits. So, you know, I'm sure you're well aware of a lot of these, but just to pick out a few, you know, remote workers, research has shown they can be up to 35 to 40% more productive than in-office counterparts, mainly because there's a lot less interruptions, you can be more focused, your work environment generally is a bit quieter, you're not sort of dealing with office politics and all this sort of thing. And actually that plays out too in what employers have noticed around productivity. So certainly my clients, many of them initially saw a productivity improvement from people being at home. A lot of them that's kind of stabilized, and actually productivity hasn't reduced, but you know, not necessarily a gain, but certainly it's not a negative thing having a more kind of dispersed workforce. So, but this obviously has an implication for how we do HR. So I wanted to share with you some thoughts, and really pulling on from what Kathryn said today, that this trust is really central to this. This is about our culture, like what culture we want to have in our organizations. And of course, that is informed by lots of different factors, but often from how the company's led, what we kind of say that we do, our values, how we sort of deal with issues, how we manage people, how we address performance issues, but also how we encourage kind of learning and improvement. And so, you know, this isn't just about changing someone's contract to say, oh, you can be more flexible in future. We're no longer going to kind of stick to the 9 to 5. What I think we're both saying today is, you know, this has to be more of a planned approach and a deliberate approach to actually change the way that we work and the way that our jobs are designed, if we're going to sustain this more kind of diverse way of working into the future. You know, COVID's been great, but it's all been a bit of a huge, great big experiment. So, sorry, just going back, there are 4 main areas that I want to cover today. So first of all, it's around your vision, the purpose, which Kathryn picked up a little bit on, and our values as a business. The second one is around performance management. The third one is around learning and continuous improvement. And the fourth one is kind of the wrapper, all about organizational culture. So these are things I think we should be proactively thinking about. And I do realise with HR, it's very easy to get distracted by the day-to-day, isn't it? You know, the headaches that appear. And of course, all of this kind of more proactive stuff does go out the window a little bit. But I just want to encourage you, and if I achieve one thing, is that, you know, after stay, you do step back and just think about these elements and what this really means for your business. You might say, well, you know, with COVID and everything, where's well-being in your kind of diagram? Isn't that sort of critical? And it is in there. Perhaps it's a wrapper around all of it. Perhaps it's in the values piece. Perhaps it's in the leadership. Perhaps it's in the organizational culture. It's in there, but I'm not going to talk about that specifically today. There's been a huge amount of communications about well-being, and I think it informs all your interactions with your staff. So it's not a specific thing, but it's definitely there. It's definitely in there. So just moving into the kind of vision, purpose, values, it's really so important for people to understand where they fit in. We're a society that wants to belong. We all like being part of a team or part of a group or part of our family, whatever it is. We want to have those kind of connections with other people. And so, you know, making sure your team has the opportunity, whatever their job is, however kind of unskilled or however highly skilled their role is, they still need to understand where they fit in. So give them the opportunity to discuss that bigger picture and what this means for them. So having those kind of wider opportunities to understand the business strategy or what your kind of plans are over the next few months or years is really, really important. If you're making changes to how you do things, it's really important to be clear about why we're doing this. What is the impact for the business? Why is it important to us? What does this mean for them as an individual in terms of their future, their growth? What does it mean for our clients? So again, it's just situating it in that wider picture. It's all too easy to kind of make changes and just assume that people will understand all of that. But actually, this is really critical for people feeling connected to your organization and, you know, motivated to work hard for it. Social purpose, Kathryn's talked about, so I'm not really going to talk a huge amount more about that, but I do think when we are recruiting candidates, they're looking for something wider than just a job. And I think it's become very important for people to feel that they're contributing not just to the organisation, not just to their own kind of lifestyle, but also to that wider kind of how the world works and maybe how green we're being, or how we're supporting our community, or how we're supporting charity partners or whatever. So think about that angle on, particularly when you're talking to your staff, you know, or new members of staff, you know, what's your impact in your community? And then it's so important to kind of share that and have visible leadership that is upholding all of that. You know, do your leaders kind of convey the messages that you want to convey about your vision, about your purpose, and are they accessible to people? So much of this is set by the top. So whilst COVID has been quite a bit of a leveler in the relationship between leaders and staff, you know, I still think it's very, there's a risk that we will kind of go back to January 2020 if your leadership teams, if that's how they like to work. You know, so when thinking about sort of flexible working or hybrid working or whatever we're calling it now, do educate your leaders about their impact on the rest of the team. You know, challenge their thinking, share the research with them. One of the ways that I found helpful to introduce kind of new ways of working when perhaps there's been a bit of resistance to it at the leadership level is to have it as a trial period. You know, to say, well, we're just going to try for the next 3 months having a bit more flexibility, or allowing people to maybe work from home certain days of the week. So doing it under a trial feels a bit less threatening. And if the trial goes well, obviously, why would they say no to that? You know, I think it's really important when you're trying to challenge leaders is to give them the stats. You know, some of the things I've talked about earlier around, you know, remote workers are more productive. The link between happiness and engaged employees and profit, you know, all of those things are the sort of things that will make leadership people sort of stand up and listen. We could go even further than this and talk about the 4-day week, which is a bit of a passion of mine, you know, looking at how companies have completely thrown our 9 to 5 days a week up in the air and said, actually, we're just going to work 4 days a week. And, you know, the amount of productivity gains that they've seen from that. I mean, one business delivered or doubled their sales calls over 4 days from what they were doing over 5 days, because people are more focused, more efficient with their time, more motivated because they were well rested over a 3-day weekend. So again, it's all to play for, I think, at the moment. How sort of radical do you really want to be? One of the things that kind of knits it all together in this area is your values. So ask yourself, do you have clear values? Do people kind of live those values? It sounds really cheesy, but the best organizations that I've worked with are crystal clear about how they do things, and that actively informs decision making and behaviors. So if you've got values, make them part of your induction, reinforce them in your communications with staff, in how you celebrate successes and how you reward great performance. If you don't have values, think about what are your values, because they will be there. You just won't have uncovered them. So then maybe there needs to be a session where you think about, how do we do things? What do we really celebrate? What do we love about the way in which people do their jobs? And you will soon be able to uncover what your kind of core values are. So moving on from that, do put any questions in the Q&A, by the way, and we can deal with those at the end. This area was all about performance management, and I did debate whether to call it performance management or something a bit nicer, like, I don't know, performance development or something. But I don't mean like disciplinary processes, which often we can call sort of performance management. I mean enabling your team to perform to their very best. And that doesn't mean having an annual appraisal, by the way. One of the things that COVID's shown us is that managing by tasks doesn't really work. We all need to manage by outcomes. And what I mean by that is being really clear about the destination, like where do you want to get to? What does the end result look like? What does great look like? And enabling or ensuring that your people really, really understand that, but allowing them to get there, via their own means. So that encourages creativity, thinking outside the box, collaboration, asking questions, learning as we go. These are all positive ways of developing people's performance, which is sort of what the goal is really. And it's really critical for job satisfaction. Managing people in small chunks where they have to sort of come back to you at the end of every single task is really dissatisfying, and it doesn't motivate people to find new ways of working. So whilst setting short-term goals is good when you're not able to kind of see someone and when they're struggling or when maybe they're going off on a tangent, particularly thinking about sort of remote working and maybe not seeing people on a daily basis, that is good. I think it still needs to be situated in the kind of the destination. So where are we trying to get to? What's the next stage that you're trying to achieve, so that they still have that ability to kind of be creative and find different ways of doing things. And that goes hand in hand with being really clear about your own expectations. So meet really regularly and communicate that. So I always recommend a monthly check-in. That doesn't have to be onerous. It's not a monthly appraisal where it takes up lots of time. And we use, with some of my clients, I use what I call a one-to-one prep sheet. So the team member has the sheet of a very sort of high-level questions to get them thinking about what they want to cover in the one-to-one that they fill out before they attend. So again, they're driving the conversation rather than waiting for the manager to sort of feedback on their performance, which is quite intimidating. They're driving the conversation. They're thinking about the types of things you might be asking them to think about is what's challenging them that month, what might they be stuck on, where do they want to be stretched, what are their aspirations for the future. So they're the kind of things that I would suggest that in a one-to-one prep form, or whatever you might want to call it, that they're kind of thinking about before they come in. And make those check-ins much more sort of developmental rather than feeding back on performance. Again, this is all about making sure that trust is high, and that they feel that there's honesty in the relationship. So moving on to organisational culture. So culture, again, is such a kind of nebulous concept, isn't it? You can't see a culture, you kind of feel it, and you kind of, it's what how people are acting, how they're behaving, rather than actually what they're doing. And culture has been quite hotly debated during sort of these COVID months. And the question, does home working destroy your culture? In my view, it doesn't, but it is much less easy to transmit it. So we need to be more intentional about what our culture is and be really clear what is the culture that you want, and maybe where are you, against that kind of criteria. This is why having sort of these lived values is so important. In a hybrid sort of working model where we've got people in and out of a central kind of location, autonomy is really, really important for teams to be able to operate effectively without that kind of centralized control. So Kathryn was talking a little bit about self-managing teams, which I think is one of the things that we should be exploring if we are going to have people a bit more federated and less kind of centrally coordinated. However, I would say, we do need to give a framework in which those teams can self-manage. So self-managing teams sounds almost a bit sort of like there's no rules and everyone kind of just goes off and does their own thing, and actually that isn't the case at all. I don't know, Kathryn, if you would agree with this, but I mean, my experience of self-managing teams is actually they're quite rigorous about process, and they have a real structure, and they, if you think about agile working as an example of sort of self-managing teams, actually that is a really clear, rigorous process, and everyone has their role and everything's very sort of laid out, and it isn't like total anarchy, which you might think self-managing teams sounds a bit like. So again, you have to be very intentional about this. It's not just about removing constraints or removing a framework. So I think actually many people will find that quite stressful, and all that will happen in that scenario is they'll just look around and see what everyone else is doing. And like I said before, if your leaders are very much still thinking about, we want to see people, we want to be 9 to 5, we want people sitting at their desk, then that's what everyone will end up doing. So when I say self-managing, I am not just saying throw away the rule book. I do think we need to be really clear about what processes we need in place to make sure those self-managing teams are able to operate freely within their defined limits, that they have the autonomy to make those decisions, that they have the delegated authority where they need it. And we shouldn't discount the value of making mistakes. So when employees don't feel free to make mistakes, they can no longer openly express their opinions. And of course, we are then limiting ourselves as an employer to be able to receive that feedback and diverse opinions, and also to feel that we are able to bring our whole selves to work. So think about how are mistakes treated in your company. Do employees have the freedom to make mistakes, or do they stay within their boundaries and operate really safely to make sure that they don't make a mistake, in which case we are impeding their creativity. One of my clients' values is fail bravely, and the strapline is because making mistakes little and often is the quickest way to learn, innovate, and become extraordinary. What a lovely thing to say, So this is a highly creative business. It's no coincidence that type of value is at the heart of everything they do, and how they kind of work with their teams, and how they're really happy for people to be quite experimental. So again, just thinking about your culture and those kind of unintentional messages that you're communicating by how we do things is really important, I think, if we're going to change the way that we're working. And lastly, just to come on to kind of learning and continuous improvement. And again, I thought a little bit about, should I use the word continuous improvement? Because it's starting to stray a little bit outside of HR, but I love the concept of continuous improvement, of people owning end-to-end processes and seeing the improvement they can make in that process, and eliminating waste, and doing things more efficiently. So I think it is absolutely connected to what we're talking about today. But just to take the first one first, connections. One of the things for the majority of staff, actually 65% in one survey said that socializing is what they miss most about working remotely. So we do need to think about how we still create effective connections in our workplaces. So social elements that we've had during the last 12 to 18 months, doing team quizzes, or, one of my clients took all their team to a llama farm, which I thought was absolutely brilliant. Just something different, just to create connection. And it's so important not to kind of lose this as we go into kind of business as usual. So if people are being a bit more federated or dispersed in how we do work, we still need to be very intentional about how we're making sure they are connected and they still feel connected as a whole. So think about that. The team quiz is not just for COVID. In terms of collaboration, actually, there's some, really, really important to make sure that the tech is right. And, it's not good enough to have, people sat around a meeting room table and then a screen over in the corner where the rest of the team is sort of really attempting to participate in the discussion. We need to think much more about how those kind of diverse ways of working are encouraged still to collaborate in a team working environment. And that probably is about investing in technology. And I don't mean investing thousands of pounds. I just mean investing some time in thinking about making the tech work and having the right tech to ensure that collaborations happen effectively. I'm going to come on to talk a little bit about the office and what the impact for the future of the office is from all of this. But you do want to for people to be able to participate effectively if they're not actually physically in the building. And then learning, alongside flexibility, career development is one of the number one factors that influences retention. The amount of people, particularly in sort of professional careers, that leave because they're not getting the career development, their career's not progressing in the way they want it to. Things like having benefits like life assurance or additional days holiday is great, but it's not really going to keep people. Actually how they, their connections to the organisation and their development of their career is a major factor. So make sure you are having those career discussions with your team members, and that your one-to-ones do have a focus on development, that they're not just about assessment. So even for individuals who don't necessarily want to progress their careers, there will still be a need for development, particularly in the new, the workplace of the future, where digital skills are going to be so important, investing in that kind of learning to keep those workers on a level playing field, with perhaps some of your younger team members for whom like engaging digitally is just part of how their relationships work. It's so important. So I feel like I'm doing a lot of talking. Please do ask any questions if you wish to. But I just want to come on. My last piece is around, what should the future workplace look like? And I've heard it described as the playground, the classroom, and the boardroom. So no longer are we all kind of coming into work, sitting in rows of desks and putting our headphones in. Actually, if we want to do a focused kind of working session, then we probably should be doing that elsewhere, either at home or in a cafe somewhere or something. So offices have, we have got a kind of, in our head, when you say office, we have got an idea of what that means. It's probably a load of desks, like I say, with some kind of private offices, a bit of meeting room space, and somewhere for people to sit and have a sandwich. And actually offices, whilst they have changed to some degree, they haven't been really entirely rethought since we've kind of gone through this process of perhaps working in a more different way. And I think as you decide, what does your future working patterns, what do they look like, you should in tandem be thinking about, and what does that mean for our working space? There's again online, there's lots of sort of debate about this, but actually, should, for example, 80% of your office be now dedicated to collaboration rather than working on our own? So that kind of turns on its head the rows of desks, and you start to think about, well, are we going to need like quiet zones for more concentrated work, and collaboration spaces for teamwork, well-being spaces to make sure people can take a bit of time out, and then just how we can kind of move through the space and have those sort of touch points with people. Because if people are coming into the office, they should be coming to collaborate, to learn, to meet people, to have those kind of chance encounters that actually when we're working from home we don't have. So you know, having those kind of areas where people can kind of bump into each other and just sit for a few minutes and have a quick chat is really, really important. So, you know, I think as well, I've talked a little bit about the tech, the same for the, you know, having the kind of access to the technology throughout the workspace is really, really important. So just to cover off a couple of kind of final points. So I've been asked quite a bit recently as well, do we need a policy on flexible working? And, you know, my answer to that is probably not. You know, I don't think a policy is necessarily the answer, but we do need to consider maybe where contractual changes need to take place. So if somebody is primarily working from home, you know, does that mean that we need to update their place of work in their contract? Possibly, you know, not necessarily, but you know, that is definitely a consideration. I do think it's important to publish a framework for how you're going to work in future, you know, whether that sets expectations just about, you know, the minimum amount of time you might expect somebody to be visible in person in your office, or, you know, whether you're going to go to wholly remote working. You know, I think giving people the heads up of what you're thinking after the 19th of July is really, really important. Otherwise, it's just that kind of like void of nobody really knows, you know, what's going to happen. So hopefully those thoughts are helpful. We haven't got any Q&A, but please do ask any. I'm going to just take you off mute actually, because it would be really helpful just to know if anyone's got any thoughts. Kathryn, do you have anything that you want to say at the end there?
Well, one of the things that really rang true is when you were talking about self-managed teams and making sure that there's a framework in place. So when I've worked with self-managed teams, the key thing to have in place is how we're going to deal with problems and how are we going to deal with conflict. And those are the two frameworks that I've put in place with self-managed teams, because typically you would turn to your people manager or your leader to say, I have this problem, solve it for me. In self-managed teams, it's around you have self-responsibility. So how do I give feedback to another person? How do I help a facilitated conversation around a problem? So that really resonated for me around, it's not just saying, yay, go and do what you want. It's about putting those structures in place to help that self-managed team have the skills and be able to thrive. So that resonated for me when you were talking about that.
And what sort of areas do you think, I mean, just thinking about the types of businesses that we've got on the call, you know, lots of kind of small businesses, and in what areas do you think self-managed teams can really kind of help businesses to, you know, what sort of issues might they use that for?
I mean, I think it's where I've seen it work really well is around projects. So if you've got particular projects that are being delivered, it's about how do you set that project team up to be sort of self-managed and using the diverse set of skills from the team. But also with really small businesses, it's about, if you're the owner or the CEO, it's about how can you create your small team, whether you've got, you know, 5 or 10 people, how can you create that kind of dynamic so you're not necessarily seen as the person sat at the top, but actually you're opening it up. So when you're making business decisions or you've got a particular challenge, like returning to work after the 19th of July, you're sharing that challenge with the team and you're collaborating together in terms of what that solution might be.
Yeah, I love the concept of the action learning for thinking about returning, because like you say, it's about spending a lot of time of focusing on the problem, and rather than just saying, oh, you know, flexible working is the answer. You know, one of my clients said to me, oh, we're going to have flexible working on a Tuesday going forward. And I sort of said to them, you know, have you kind of shared this with the team, and how does the team feel about that? Because for me, that doesn't really sound like flexible working. But it was quite interesting when it got opened up that, you know, there were very different perceptions of what flexible working actually means for people. And yeah, so I don't know, spending more time on the problem, it sounds to me like it can be really revealing.
Yeah, it is.
Anyone want to ask either of us a question?
I don't know, it's a question you can answer. Hi, sorry, Charlie from Creation Theatre. But one of the things we find with flexible working, we've always been we do evenings and weekends, and so there's usually people kind of in and out and all over the place. But what we're struggling with at the moment is knowing who's working when without feeling like you're checking up on everybody. And like, I work 4 days a week. I happen to have swapped one of my days this week for childcare, and I don't know where to put that piece of information so that the people who need it can find it, and anyone who's planning. And also with kind of other members of the team, we've got a few people on Kickstart at the moment, which is brilliant, but they only work 5 hours a day. And I've said to them, I do not mind when those 5 hours are, but it is actually quite useful for me and for their sort of line managers to know when they're working. But I don't want a like Google Calendar nightmare, because I want it to be more flexible than that. But the one thing we're finding is we really don't mind when people work, but it is quite useful to know when people are working. And how do you manage that? I'm not checking up on when people are working, but I would quite like to know, just so I can ask them things and not bother them out of hours and all that, or out of their hours if they're out of hours anymore. Yeah.
Did you have any thoughts on that, Kathryn?
So one of the things that I have, so the first question that came to my mind is, why do you need to know, and perhaps exploring that a bit more. But then the other thing that I've come across, and I'm not going to get the words right, but it's about when you need to do synchronous and when you need to do sort of non-synchronous communications. So a lot of international organizations have been grappling with this issue for many years. And it's about using the tech. So you know, you've got chat panes where you might set, and again, this is about having the structures in place. You might set a thing in terms of, well, if you want to get in touch with me, you can put something in the particular messaging platform that you're using, but there's not an expectation that you have to immediately reply. So that's where I've seen one organization use that, keeping in touch, but it kind of being okay that you don't have to immediately respond. But yeah, those are my two thoughts. I don't know, Jane, what were you thinking?
Yeah, I've seen I mean, how are they on the like email system or whatever, Charlie? Or
we
are
use
they...
Slack. Is that what you were alluding to, Kathryn? Yeah, so we use Slack kind of in that way. But yeah, maybe it's just making clear that I don't need people to get back to me. But I don't know if they're not getting back to me because they're doing a task that they're currently focusing on for 10 minutes, or because they don't start work for 2 hours. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it's just, I mean, I guess you're small enough probably to, once you know what people are doing, then you've got a rough idea. But I mean, is it just through like regular check-ins that you kind of gain an understanding of their work pattern? Or, you know, I know what you're saying, because I always cringe when I have clients who are sort of using like a clock in, clock out system, and some of them can't really get around that because the way they charge their clients. But I always think it is a shame. There must be a better way of doing that. But
I sort of don't want people to have to feel they're justifying, you know, if say they've got something on that particular day, you know, either something like a doctor's appointment that you kind of would be given time off, or, you know, unpaid time off, or work the hours back, or just something where it's like, do you know what, it's a really nice morning and I want to take my dog for a walk and I want to start, and I'm happy to work a bit later this evening. And I don't mind if people do that, but then I find that I'm messaging them sort of thinking, well, everyone starts roughly 9 o'clock, and then I don't. I don't know. We haven't nailed it, definitely not.
No, and I will have a think about that and maybe come back to you separately about what other people are doing around that. You know, without being too intrusive, like you say.
Yeah, it's wanting to give kind of maximum flexibility, but then actually needing a bit of information. But mostly, like, Kathryn, to answer your question about why do we need to know, it's sort of the feeling that I don't want people to feel like they have to answer my questions all hours of day and night. I could just be asking something, and then they could answer me later. And but maybe that's more to do with being clear about that.
I wonder if anyone else on the call might have anything for Charlie to think about. So Danielle's asked a question. How do you think we strike the right balance between leaders and staff who want to be in the office constantly and those who now prefer work from home the majority of the time? This is a great question. I would like to communicate a flexible business, but it feels one-sided at the moment, in that let's get back to the office. Yeah, I think this is a great question. And there's, again, it's another area where there's been a lot of debate around, do people start to become invisible does that mean that they get overlooked for things like promotion or the best projects, you know, because they're not being seen by kind of like the leadership? I think it's a tricky one. Do you have any thoughts, Kathryn, on that? Sorry, I'm not trying to make you answer all the hard questions.
I mean, I think these types of organisations only work if they're led, you know, if the leaders are role modelling the changes that people want to see. So, you know, if you've got a leadership team who's going to be in the office from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m, then your whole organisation is just going to follow suit. So it's just not going to work. Whereas if you've got a leadership team who's working in the same ways that they're expecting their employees to, then it kind of, it's okay. It's kind of those undiscussables around what's okay and what's not okay within an organisation. So kind of answers Charlie's bit in terms of, are you setting the culture around it's okay not to immediately respond to stuff, or it's so I think that's the challenge. I think the difficulty is that many leaders have been very successful in their careers based on this kind of this structure and ways of working. So it's quite a big mindset change to take, but yeah, it does need to be led from the top, I think.
Danielle, you put your hand up. Do you want to just chip in there? I've seen Joe, you have too, but go on, Danielle.
I was just going to add, for our leadership, their working from home experience probably wasn't as great as others. So they had a very busy household. They had another this that ran from there. So their preference became to come into the office, which is completely fine. But the message now is slightly mixed. I'm trying to promote flexibility and, you know, the self-managed team aspect, but boss does like to be in all day, every day. So even when I introduced the strap line on our emails about we're working flexibly, we don't expect a response, you know, outside of your normal working hours, which might help the previous conversation. I was instructed to put it as, this is only a temporary measure, and I was more fluid and more attractive. So I have my gut feeling, we're going back into the office next week. That's been our instruction, that we want, you know, staff need to be back in for next week. So I have a feeling that little strap line, which has been quite useful, will be removed.
Yeah, that's such a shame.
Yeah, I think Danielle, what you might find is that employees are kind of voting with their feet. So there's quite a lot of research that's coming out at the moment that organisations that just aren't offering the flexibility, or that flexibility isn't lived, will move to organisations that are. So maybe your organisation doesn't see it as a massive lever for change at the moment, but it will do because employees just aren't accepting going back to how things were.
Is it worth thinking about? Oh, sorry, Joe, I know, Joe, you were going to chip in, actually. Do you want to go, Joe? Did you have something to suggest there?
It wasn't sort of particularly groundbreaking, but a lot of this comes down to the sort of activity and output argument, doesn't it? Anything to do with flexibility of work. And if you're just judging people on the hours they do rather than the output that they produce, then you're batting on a sticky wicket, aren't you?
Yeah, completely. No, I do agree with that.
But you know, not a lot of working culture is always open to sort of, you know, allowing that, or yeah, it's not necessarily the culture that a lot of workplaces are going for. But if you want to get the best out of your individuals, I mean, you know, I run a small business here at Hadbury Park, and if people can do everything I need them to do in 3 hours, great, go home after 3 hours. You know, it's. And I think that way, you know, in my experience, you get a lot more out of people if you have that flexible approach.
And that's obviously going to be a high trust environment that you have there then, because you're not thinking, well, you know, they should be doing something, you know, that's on the kind of to-do list that we haven't done previously. You know, I want to get everything out of them. You know, I think that's a really positive.
Yeah, I mean, if I came in on a Monday morning, having not been in on a Friday, and a load of things that I'd expected to be done weren't done because someone went home at 1 o'clock,
then you wouldn't be happy.
Yeah, that's not how you tee it up, is it? So.
No, absolutely. But I wondered, Danielle, for you, whether it's worth talking about having a trial period, so that if your leaders aren't sort of naturally thinking, oh, flexible working, it doesn't work for them, so won't work for anyone else, maybe they would be willing to say, look, let's have some flexibility and within boundaries. So, some of my clients are saying, like, we expect to see you 3 days a week in the office, but which days they are is up to you, and we're happy for you to work 2 days from home, or maybe even just 1 day, 1 day a week flex is better than nothing, So do you think they might be willing to look at a trial period?
Yeah, I think I sort of thought of that, because I think, as you said earlier, the socialising aspect and meeting up with people and just maybe overhearing those conversations that either you know something about or you can learn something from is the invaluable bit that we're missing. So I was going to try and look at maybe an overlap day where we could have the majority of people in. We could share, that collaboration and learning. But yeah, I will suggest the trial and just see if we can look at some flexibility on when people are in. I think it's because we are relatively small, and we've got more of a mixture of a lot more part-time staff than full-time. So I get sort of where it's coming from. It's just not coming across in the right way. So I just need to try and get the right balance of what we're trying to get to here.
Yeah, definitely. But doing a little of something to normalise it, might be quite positive. And then, I had clients who at the beginning, before we had all this kind of pandemic thing, they would never have even considered flexible working. They were totally anti, wanted everyone in the office every single day. And they've had a complete about turn, and it's been quite amazing, to see that transformation. So, and I think it is just about testing it and seeing actually it doesn't impact on productivity or on client engagement or on, people's actually motivation. People aren't sitting at home watching the telly when they've just logged on quickly to Teams and, then they've got to put their feet up. Generally, people are actually working harder, and we need to be supporting them to take breaks, is my experience.
I think that's one of my messages I've sent in the most polite way. I'm looking forward to getting back to my hours. Not doing my hours plus.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, it's a really good point.
Thank you both.
No, thank you ever so much for everyone for joining. Well, that is the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for your time. It's really appreciated. And we'll drop you a little line afterwards if you've got any questions that you want to ask us. I'll send round our contact details, so please do get in touch and enjoy the rest of your day.